Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the latest mission from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. So good to have you with us here in the pre-dawn hours of Thursday, August 28th. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at the Kennedy Space Center. As you can see from our countdown clock in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, SpaceX is currently within an hour from its latest launch of a Falcon 9 rocket, set to blast off from historic Launch Complex 39A here at KSC. Teams are working towards the launch of 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites, adding to the growing mega constellation on orbit. In fact, so far this year, as of yesterday's launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, SpaceX has launched more than 1,800 satellites this year alone across 74 previous Falcon 9 launches. Today will be the 75th flight of a Falcon 9 in support of the Starlink constellation. For that reason, of course, it is SpaceX's most often flown payload. Today will be the 106th launch of a Falcon 9 rocket in 2025. As we're getting our coverage started, I want to thank the more than 300 of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream. It's a great free way to help support what we do here at Spaceflight Now and help to bring this live launch coverage to more folks around the world. Want to give a shout out to our moderators in the chat today. Thanks to Mark Otto and to Aussie Space Girl for being with us this morning. You can help the moderator's job become just that much easier in the chat by just following our rules. We ask that you converse in English so that the mods can respond as appropriate. Also, that you hold off on delving into overt politics and religion. We ask that you respectfully don't type in all caps, and also emojis are certainly fine, but just with respect to everyone else in the chat, don't spam huge blocks of emojis so that it takes up a good percentage of the chat so that everyone else can have an opportunity to speak their piece. And most importantly, be sure to treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated. This and every other live launch opportunity are made possible in no small part by the ongoing support of our wonderful channel member community. So thanks to folks like I Am Lita, Parker Isaacson, Joni, Sulfur for Lunch, and many, many others. Rita Loy, good morning. David Humphreys, hello to you. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course, the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space or spaceflight, or like Michael McGrory, just want to offer a little bit of support this morning, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature to have your comment or query elevated for discussion, assuming that is appropriate, of course. Not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the count, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. That said, we do know that these are difficult financial times for a lot of folks, so even if you're not able to support with membership or the Super Chat feature, we certainly appreciate your time and attention and value that just as much. So thank you for being here. And again, you can support for free just by clicking that like button. Also hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel. Turn on notifications so that you'll be made aware next time we begin a live broadcast or post a new video to the website, or to the YouTube channel, I should say. Speaking of which, if you haven't spotted it already, there is a new channel or a new video up on the channel now. That's the full part of Kiko's words regarding the Starship program writ large, especially its upcoming presence here in Florida. It was part of his address to the Space Coast Symposium and Expo. That was this past Friday. Played some of that for you during our two broadcasts for the scrubs of the Starship Flight 10 mission, as well as the actual launch coverage itself. But if you don't want to go back and hunt for it within one of those videos, we posted it separately for your viewing convenience. Also, as we're getting going here today, I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, who's running the technical operations of the broadcast. Photographer John Pisani is the man behind the cameras today, making sure everything is ship shape and in focused and ready to track the Falcon 9 once it does leave the pad there at LC-39A. Our photographers, Michael and Adam, are off this morning, but if you're not already following our photography team, you can find them at their handles here on X. John is at John Pisani Photo. Michael is at MD Kane Jr. and Adam Bernstein at ABurn NYC. You can also follow us at Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. We're also on Blue Sky, Threads, and Facebook if you yourself are not on X. We'll also be joined a little bit later in the broadcast by our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with CNG Images. Actually, got their view of the Falcon 9 rocket from down on Merritt Island right now. Correction, Chuck and Jen are up in Titusville today. Time now is currently T minus 51 minutes, 26 seconds. In a little more than 20 minutes from now, SpaceX is set to make the call on the start of propellant load for its Falcon 9 rocket. We'll go over the launch countdown timeline here in just a moment, but worth noting at the top of the broadcast, and we'll go into this in more detail as the count rolls on. But today's Falcon flight set to mark a reuse milestone for SpaceX, as this particular booster with the tail number 1067 is set to make a record-setting 30th flight to space and back. It'll target a touchdown on the drone ship called a short fall of gravitas about 8.5 minutes after liftoff. It is the first Falcon booster that will be flown for a 30th time, as SpaceX is continuing to head on the road towards 40 launches and landings with its booster. Taking a closer look into the Falcon 9 rocket, you can see a little bit of venting there from the strong back. This is more of a typical vent that we see here at Launch Complex 39A. This will subside before SpaceX gets into fueling its Falcon 9 rocket. Once the go-ahead is given, that tanking process will begin at the T minus 35 minutes. Also, slightly misspoke just a moment or two ago. I said we're about 20 minutes from that decision point. I meant to say we're closer to 10 minutes, just about 11 and a half, if you want to be more particular about it right now. So let's go ahead and delve into that countdown timeline since I keep alluding to it. T minus 38 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load for today's Falcon flight. As mentioned, once that go ahead for fueling is given, tanking will begin at T minus 35 minutes with a loading of RP1, a rocket grade kerosene, aboard the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen will start to flow on board the rocket's first stage. T minus 30 minutes is when SpaceX will start to add cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels for the first stage as well. Same will be true on the second stage a few minutes after that. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. T minus 23 minutes is when the second stage RP1 tank is full. Then T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down process begins. SpaceX at this point in the count is thermally conditioning the feed lines there at the pad ahead of loading liquid oxygen on board the rocket's second stage. Here at pad 39A, we see this visually manifest as the so-called big vent at about T minus 20 minutes and 30 seconds. This 4-minute vent will wrap up and then second stage lock load will begin at the 16-minute mark. 7 minutes before liftoff, the engine chill sequence begins. SpaceX flows a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps for those 9 Merlin 1D engines, and that'll help protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. 6 minutes before takeoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the retraction of the strong back away from the Falcon 9 rocket. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the transporter erector, otherwise referred to as the strong back, well, it'll pull back roughly a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and will then stay in that position until liftoff. At that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before takeoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. And at T minus 2 minutes, same will be true on the second stage. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds of the countdown, Falcon 9 rocket will enter into its automated startup sequence, which will be called audibly by the note that the Falcon 9 is in startup. What that means is control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and at the same time, propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will then give their go for launch call 45 seconds before flight. The engine ignition command will be issued at T minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Once again, coming up this morning at 4:12 a.m. Eastern, 08:12 UTC, or in 45 minutes and 45 seconds. Taking a look at our live chat here this morning, want to thank a few folks for your support. Thanks to David Humphreys for a very generous $25 super chat. Thank you so much, David, one of our channel members. Good to see you this morning. Also, thanks again to David for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity and helping to grow our community here. So to our 5 newest gifted members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank David in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership beyond the month you were just gifted. And just as a quick reminder for how gifting works, once someone does gift memberships, it is entirely random to whom they go. Neither we as Spaceflight Now nor the gifter have control over that allocation. So if you are randomly selected, congratulations. YouTube algorithm spun in your favor today. A little bit hard to see the environment around the pad given the lack of lighting right now, but just to take a beat and talk about the weather. Unfortunately, we didn't have a launch weather forecast for yesterday morning's Starlink launch, but we do for today. According to the 45th Weather Squadron, we're looking at an 85% chance for favorable weather conditions for today's Falcon flight. Only concern is for the low probability of interference from cumulus clouds today. If for whatever reason SpaceX is unable to launch, whether from the weather or a technical issue, they do have another window that opens up tomorrow, I believe. In a 24-hour backup scenario, SpaceX is looking at the same weather conditions. Liftoff winds are light today, trending between 5 to 10 miles per hour. Booster recovery weather also not in the primary risk factors as well. And no interfering solar activity, which is certainly good. We're looking at a satellite view of the clouds over the Florida Peninsula. You can see there's a good little cluster of them well offshore, but the Falcon 9 rocket today is going to be flying in a northeasterly trajectory, heading along the coast of the United States as it makes its climb uphill. And you can see there are just some thin, wispy clouds to the north of the pad, so should be pretty smooth sailing and not too much interference in the way of clouds in the northeast part of Florida and southeast Georgia. So as the rocket makes its ascent, should have a pretty good light show this morning. Be sure to tag us on social media as well if you're able to get any photos or video of the Falcon 9 rocket. Love to see what you're able to capture. Again, we are simply at Spaceflight Now on most places. Time now T minus 39 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. This week, of course, has been a big one for SpaceX's Starship program with a predominantly successful Flight 10. Some good learning was achieved by SpaceX as it looks to continue maturing that rocket before it brings it to here in Florida. You can just barely make out the Starship launch and catch tower there to the right of the pad, the Falcon pad, that is. You see those two red pulsing lights there on the tower, of course, uh, there for any aircraft in the area. Earlier this week on Tuesday, there were a pair of in-person meetings so that folks in the Central Florida area could learn more about Starship operations at Launch Complex 39A. Here's a look back at some video from dozens of folks that showed up to be at this very first meeting at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. For those interested, there is another pair of meetings set for later today in Cape Canaveral at the Radisson. The layout will look somewhat similar to this, with those placards stationed around one of the main ballrooms so that folks can learn more and ask questions to the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, learn more about what SpaceX is proposing and get some info from its draft environmental impact statement. Barring some significant shift in things, the timeline for developing this project looks like uh, the input and review from the draft EIS is going to continue on throughout the early fall period, where they'll continue to gather comments until September 22nd from the public. In addition to the in-person meetings later today, there will also be one more virtual meeting, which is scheduled for September 3rd from 6 to 8 p.m. That'll be via a Zoom webinar. Following the close of public comment, the FAA will continue to analyze and assess all of the information that was given by the public, as well as from the various partners and entities that are involved in this assessment. It's expected to statement and additional closing out documents, and will make its record of decision sometime in the winter of this year. So Starship operations aren't expected to begin until early 2026 at the soonest. Of course, SpaceX is also evaluating Starship operations down at Space Launch Complex 37. That environmental discussion and analysis is being headed primarily by the Department of the Air Force. Decision point coming from Slick 37 is expected, I believe, in the fall timeframe, since they got the ball rolling a little bit faster on that one. We've already seen some preliminary work out at Slick 37, including the demolition of some of the big Delta IV Heavy launch infrastructure that was previously owned and managed by United Launch Alliance, the now former occupants of that pad. Speaking of pad occupants, here at Launch Complex 39A, that of course is SpaceX, and they're just about 35.5 minutes away from launching their latest Falcon 9 rocket. Assuming the go-ahead was given and the count still rolls on, tanking of this vehicle is expected to begin in now less than 15 seconds. Now T minus 34 minutes and counting. We're watching for visual evidence of fueling since SpaceX typically does not announce the start of tanking for its Falcon 9 rocket when it comes to just a typical Starlink launch these days. Thankfully, it's a relatively clear night here on the Space Coast. Not a lot of heat distortion between our camera and the rocket as well. What we're looking for is if you see in the lettering of SpaceX just beneath the X, there's that lighter band where the soot is kind of broken up on the booster. It's right about that point that we'll start to see a bit of a frost line form as the super cold densified liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the booster of this Falcon 9 rocket. Given the difference in temperature between the LOX and the considerably warmer and more humid Florida air, we'll also start to see a bit of vapor cascading off the rocket as well. And you can see a little bit of the vapor that I was just talking about now creeping up the side of the Falcon 9 rocket, just to the left of the X, a little bit to the right as well, in between the rocket and the strong back from this camera's perspective. So, with that good visual indication, you're now confident in saying that the Falcon 9 rocket is fueling for liftoff, which means SpaceX is now locked into its current T0 time at 4:12 a.m. Eastern, 0812 UTC. Time now T minus 27 minutes, 9 seconds and counting. If you're just now joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starlink 10-11 mission, the first time that SpaceX will fly a booster for its 30th time. The company is working towards certifying its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. SpaceX is making good progress on tanking its Falcon 9 rocket. Of course, RP-1 flowing on both the first and second stages, liquid oxygen loading on the first stage as well. We're just about 10 minutes away from the start of LOX load on the second stage. In between now and then, though, SpaceX will need to thermally condition the feed lines there at the pad, and we'll see the start of the so-called big vent at about T minus 20 minutes and 30 seconds. On the way there, since this is the first time that we're getting a 30th flight of a first stage booster, let's go ahead and talk about the flight leader for SpaceX booster with the number of 1067. It is not actually the oldest flying booster in SpaceX's roster. That distinction belongs to B1063, which is we actually just saw in action launching the Naus rideshare mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base. I lifted off on the 26th. B1067, though, began flying in June of 2021. Its first mission happened to be a cargo dragon, not a crew dragon. That will come up next. This was the 22nd Commercial Resupply Services, or CRS mission. Cargo Dragon vehicle with the number 209, making its first flight as well. That was followed up by the Crew 3 mission, sending 4 astronauts on their way to the International Space Station on board the Dragon named Endurance. Followed up by a Turkish communications satellite, Turksat 5B, on December 2021. Following April, Crew 4 was next up to bat, launching on Dragon Freedom. This was the 4th Crew Dragon vehicle to be introduced into the fleet, and up until the debut of Grace was the most recently named Dragon for SpaceX. Freedom also has the distinction of being the last Crew Dragon named by a cadre of professional NASA astronauts. Of course, Grace was originally set to be flown on a commercial crew program mission, but long story short, it ended up being the capsule that flew the most recent Axiom space private astronaut mission to the space station. And so that crew, being the first to fly on board, got the distinction of etching its name into the Dragon history books. That was followed up by another Dragon mission, a cargo flight, once again, CRS-25, heading up to station, launching on July 14th of 2022. The first Starlink flight for this booster was Starlink 4-34 on September 19th, followed up by the Hotbird 13G satellite on behalf of Eutelsat at the time. A pair of satellites for SES followed that, O3B mPOWER numbers 1 and 2 in December of 2022. Back to a few Starlink missions after that. We had Starlink 5-2 on January 26th, 5-5 on March 24th, and 5-9 on May 14th. Followed up by the Satria satellite mission on June 18th of 2023. Back to Starlink land we go for a few more. 6-10 on August 17th, 6-22 on October 13th, 6-29 on November 22nd, and 6-35 on January 7th. Followed up by the Telkomsat Maraputa 2 satellite, launching on February 20th of 2024. Back for more Starlinks, 4 more in a row. 6-45 on March 31st, 6-55 on May 3rd, 8-5 on June 5th. And got to turn the page for this booster. 8-3 on August 10th. That was followed up then by a couple of navigation satellites for the European Commission. The first time that SpaceX launched a pair of the Galileo satellites, FMs 26 and 32, launching on September 18th. KoreaSat 6A was up next on November 11th, and then it's Starlinks from then on out. 6-70 on December 4th, 12-12 on January 10th, 12-8 on February 15th, 6-73 on April 14th, 6-83 on May 13th, and most recently, Starlink 10-25 on July 2nd. Been about 57 days since we last saw this booster fly. We're coming up on that big vent in just about 10 seconds. And there you see the start of the big vent right on time. Seventeen and a half minutes remaining on the clock at this point. We've got less than a minute left to go before the wrap up of the so-called big vent. And with the conclusion now of the big vent, second stage lock zone is ready to begin. 14 minutes remaining before the planned departure of this Falcon 9 rocket. Talking about the payload on board, 28 more Starlink V2 mini satellites getting ready to head up into low Earth orbit. Today's flight will be the 75th time that SpaceX launches a batch of Starlink satellites this year. These V2 mini optimized satellites clock in at a lighter weight, allowing SpaceX to launch more of them in a single flight of a Falcon 9 rocket. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters tip to tip. They use argon Hall effect thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They're built up in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. Today they'll be deployed at about 172 miles or 277 kilometers in altitude at a 53 degrees inclination. As we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, today's flight of Falcon 9 first stage booster B1067 will mark its 30th trip to space and back, very much warranting a revisit of our Falcon frequent flyer chart. Of course, here's where things currently stand before today's flight, with B1067 having achieved 29 previous missions. Here's what the rest of the list looks like. Two-way tie still for second place between B1063 and B1071. You got B1069 with 26 flights so far, and 77 and 78 with 22 apiece as well. Falcon booster B1076 hasn't flown since February of this year, so That might be up next to bat. We might have another three-way tie down there at the bottom of the list. We'll have to wait and see what SpaceX has in store in the near future. Just about 9 minutes to go on this Falcon 9 rocket launch today. Coming up in just about 2 minutes, SpaceX will flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. Time now, T minus 6 minutes, 49 seconds and counting. Coming up at about the 6 minute mark, the first stage RP1 tank should be full. Of course, it's a busy time here on the Space Coast, not only for SpaceX and its Falcon 9 rocket, but some other launch providers as well. Taking a look at what's happening a little bit down the range at Launch Complex 36 on Monday, Blue Origin happened to conduct another static fire test of its New Glenn second stage. This is serial number 3, as shared by Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp. Back in April, they did a static fire for the New Glenn second stage that will be used to launch NASA's Escapade satellites with a current launch date of no earlier than September 29th. This will be used for the third flight of a New Glenn rocket. Before we go ahead and see the next flight of this Falcon 9, though, let's take a moment to talk about where it's going to be heading once it leaves the pad. Before we go ahead and get some pad level views, talking trajectory. Falcon 9 rocket will fly in a northeasterly
Falcon
flight
9
path.
are pressing for the start of strong back lower.
Following stage separation, B-1067 is going to target a touchdown on the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. As we've been discussing throughout the broadcast, this will be the booster's 30th liftoff and hopefully a 30th good landing on that drone ship. SpaceX will also attempt to recover the
lower automation has started.
Payload fairings on this mission as well. Speaking of those fairings, let's go ahead and take a look at them up close as that strong back is getting ready to recline away from the Falcon 9 rocket in the moments ahead. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the transporter erector, that large white structure parallel to the rocket right now, will recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and then stay in that position until liftoff. You can see those clamp arms are now fully open. You're seeing just a slight recline away from the rocket as well, it looks like. Coming up on 3 minutes before flight. It's a very slow process for the strong backs movements right now. It'll be much more rapid once the rocket is ready to take off. As you just heard, the booster's liquid oxygen tank is now full. We should hear a similar call regarding the second stage at about the 2-minute mark.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And with that good call, the Falcon 9 rocket is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. The venting that you're seeing there at the pad now are the ground gas closeouts.
Yes, launch closeouts have started.
This is SpaceX releasing the remaining liquid oxygen in the fuel lines before flight, coming up in just a little more than 1 minute.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And with that call, we're just waiting the SpaceX launch director to make their go for launch call, coming in the next few seconds.
The launch director is go for launch.
And with that, we're now less than 30 seconds away from the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. "15 seconds. And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and a liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 10-11 mission, a record-setting 30th flight of B-1067. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. And a good ascent to the Falcon 9 rocket, a little more than 1 minute into flight.
Max Q.
Coming up on MVAC chill, thermal conditioning of the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage.
Vac chill has started.
With that good call, we're awaiting a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff at about T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds, followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine. The fairings will be jettisoned just before the 3-minute mark. Now just a little more than 2 minutes into flight.
Vehicles following a nominal trajectory.
And we see Miko.
Stage separation confirmed.
Vac ignition.
Good calls there from SpaceX. Good visuals. Looking to fairing jettison momentarily.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And a good look at those Starlink V2 Mini optimized satellites. A little more than 3 minutes into the mission now. Coming up, the next milestone of the mission will be the entry burn beginning, when SpaceX uses 3 out of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of B-1067 to greatly slow that vehicle down. Nearly 4.5 minutes into the mission so far. Again, the entry burn set to start at about T plus 6 minutes and 9 seconds. That burn lasting less than 30 seconds in duration. Appears to be a nominal flight of both the booster and the second stage so far. Less than a minute to the start of the entry burn.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Good call for the start of entry burn. Just catching glimpses of it in our tracking camera.
Entry burn shut down.
Both vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Good trajectory call. Before the start of the entry burn, we also heard that the FTS or the booster was safed. The flight termination system no longer needed at this stage in flight. A little more than 7 minutes into the mission. Coming up next is the start of the single engine landing burn. That will take booster 1067 onto what will hopefully be a soft landing on the drone ship called a short fall of gravitas.
Stage 1 transonic.
Booster traveling below the speed of sound now. A good touchdown today would be the 122nd for that particular drone ship.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Stage 2
Stage 1
FTS
landing
is
confirmed.
saved.
And for the 30th time, B-1067 has safely landed.
AVAC shutdown.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And with a good confirmation of a nominal orbit insertion, coming up next will be the coast phase that is just entered. That will last until T plus 54 minutes and 36 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn to help circularize the orbit. And then the Starlink satellites will be released at T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 56 seconds. As we get our launch replays in order for you, want to thank a few folks in the live chat before we turn to our mission stats as they currently stand. Want to thank CRV Components for a $10 super chat. Thank you, CRV. They say, can't believe my favorite booster 1067 is launching on my birthday. Couldn't ask for better timing. Happy birthday, Hayden. I'm glad you got a good 30 flown candle for your birthday. Also want to thank Psychonaut69, one of our channel members, for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Thank you, Psychonaut. To our newest gifted member, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Psychonaut for the membership, and we hope you decide to stick around with membership beyond the month you were just gifted. Also, thanks again to Michael McGrory, another one of our channel members, for a super chat, saying go beat 1067, 30 missions and counting. And yes, SpaceX is working towards certifying its boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. So B-1067 will continue to be a key part of that mission. As we showed you earlier in the broadcast, and for those of you who saw the launch earlier this week with us, B-1063 also has 27 missions to its name so far, as does B-1071. Before we go ahead and see the flight of B-1067 in our replays once again, let's take a beat to recap and show you where we are as far as today's mission stats. Of course, the big highlight was the 30th flight of this particular first stage booster, 1067 in the SpaceX fleet. This was the 523rd Falcon 9 launch to date, the 106th Falcon 9 launch of the year so far. This was SpaceX's 459th Falcon booster reflight, with a launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was the company's 156th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 117th orbital flight from Pad 39A for SpaceX, and the 211th overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Here's where SpaceX stands on their Falcon launches year over year. Company has their sights set on reaching 170 by year's end. Moving on to some recovery stats. That good touchdown that we just saw was the 122nd landing successfully on a shortfall of gravitas. This was the 401st drone ship landing for SpaceX, and the 495th overall SpaceX booster landing to date. Finally, with some industry stats for 2025, this was the 73rd orbital launch from Florida. I'll pause and note that at this point in the year, we have now surpassed the total number of launches achieved in all of 2023. There were 93 launches in 2024, so the Cape is well on its way to exceeding that number this calendar year. This was the 112th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 124th from a U.S. rocket company, and the 194th global launch attempt. There have been 5 orbital launch failures around the world so far, and here is where our pie chart now currently stands. With this launch now in the books, we've got our next launch of a Falcon 9 rocket coming up the evening of Friday, August 29th. And that'll be the flight of the Starlink 17-7 mission with 24 Starlink V2 Mini satellites on board. Before we get there, though, let's take a look back at the mission that SpaceX just accomplished and is, of course, still in progress as the Starlink satellites haven't been deployed. But let's wind the clock back to where we began, starting with the press site fixed view from John Pisani. And that'll go ahead and do it for our live coverage of the Starlink 10-11 mission. Certainly appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us here on this early Thursday morning. Want to thank our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images for helping us out with tracking today. Thanks as well to our moderators, Mark Otto and Aussie Space Girl, and to channel member Cumulus Granatus for helping to answer folks' questions in the live chat as well. Mentioned the Friday night launch from Vandenberg is the next Falcon flight coming up, but after that, the next local launch here in Florida set to be on the 31st at about 7:15 a.m. That'll be Starlink 10-14. 28 more Starlink satellites going up on that Falcon flight from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and Space Launch Complex 40. Want to thank our photographer, John Pisani, for doing some excellent tracking work. And as I teased in yesterday's broadcast, John and I will actually be going out on a reporting assignment later on this morning and look forward to bringing you more from that later on today. So now's a great time to hit that subscribe button and keep your eyes peeled to our social channels as we've got some more coming up from a NASA mission coming down the pike, and I'll leave the tease at that. Be sure to follow John at his handle there, John Pisani Photo, as well as our other photographers who you can see here on the screen as well. Thanks also to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast today. Most importantly, though, thanks to you for wherever you've been watching from. I always look forward to bringing you these launches and look forward to welcoming you back in when next we've got an orbital flight to cover. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.